Welcome to the Susan Brender Show. It's all about you, featuring shows on health and wellness, the performing arts, politics, and people who inspire you to be your very best. And now, here's Susan Brender.
I'm Susan Brender, and this is the Susan Brender Show. Today, my guest is General Flynn. He has over 33 years of service in our nation's military, culminating as the Director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, DIA, and as the nation's highest serving military intelligence officer, he is really somebody to be proud of. His experience is broad and ranges in areas such as intelligence, counterintelligence, security, and cyber. I want to welcome to the Susan Brender Show, General Flynn.
Thank you, Susan, for that great introduction. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, as Director of the DIA, General Flynn, you also served as the commander of the Joint Functional Command for Intelligence Surveillance for the Department of Defense. That is quite a service that you've done for our country. When did that all start?
Well, I don't know how far back you want to go, but I decided as a young kid that I was going to join the military. My father served in World War II in Korea, and I entered through the ROTC program at the great University of Rhode Island, and 33 plus years later, I found myself, serving this country very proudly, and I loved every minute of it. My time in the jobs that you just described started in the summer of 2012, so I was the Director of the Defense Intelligence Agency for 2 years, and also the commander for essentially all intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance capabilities for the Department of Defense for those same 2 years. So it was a lot of fun.
Fun. You call it fun. It sounds like you did quite a job, and you also were surrounded by the amazing people, too. Now, let me ask you something. I remember many years ago, Janet Reno was interviewed when she left the Clinton administration, and one of the things that she said when somebody asked her, what are you going to do next? She said, cyber terrorism. That's my goal. She said, because there are many things happening in this world, but that's almost the number one thing that I want to concentrate on. Now, how do you, when you listen to that, what do you say?
I think that she was right then. Cyber is definitely an area that I have a lot of expertise in, and I am deeply involved in that. I would say that my goal is to do whatever I can to help this country, the United States of America, continue to be the best country in the world, and to help with our national security. So if I can do that out of uniform, as I did that in uniform, from a business perspective, and I believe I can. I will only deal with people or countries or companies that at the end of the day are strong friends or allies of ours, or companies that have an interest in our national security. So that's kind of where I am. Our national security is number one reason that gets me up and going every day.
Sir, how often is America's online security attacked by outside countries?
Millions and millions of times a day. So I'm going to say that again, Susan. It's attacked millions and millions times a day. Both our government and our what I call our commercial critical infrastructure, such as our telecommunications, healthcare, energy sector, our transportation sector. So millions and millions of times per day. It is stunning how often nation states, such as China, Russia, Iran, or criminal organizations, transnational criminal organizations attack our various networks, and it's something that we're not prepared for right now. We need to do more to prepare for this inevitable theft of intellectual property and other things that are going on right now as we speak.
So what does the U.S. do about these attempts? Are there legal repercussions taken against them?
Well, we're still, big question. Great question. There's still too much hand-wringing in Congress, to be honest with you. And I think that our defense systems are pretty good. I actually ran at the Defense Intelligence Agency. I ran the largest top-secret communications network in the world. We had 230,000 customers. And I still am enormously proud of the people that worked to defend that network, and we felt very confident that we were that we actually did defend it, and were able to keep our enemies out of it. Now that's at a different level, and we put a lot of resources and people into doing that. And it was important because it was our nation's top secret communications network. When you go down below that, and you just start talking about the conversation that we're having over this phone network, this podcast, these are not defended very well at all. And so we have too much legislation pending. We have too little action and too many words being thrown around instead of real legitimate practical actions that must be taken. And if for your listeners, I guess, Susan, for your listeners, I would just offer that they really need to, particularly those business, small, medium, and large business owners out there, they have to take this very seriously. You can't sit back and go, nobody will bother us, nobody will attack us. They will. I mean, I've been attacked personally. My credit cards have been taken, stolen. I've had to re-get those. So just as an individual, as an individual American, I've been attacked. I know what the criminal and state organizations are doing to many companies and corporations out there to basically steal the information that they have and use it to their benefit. So we have to really take this very seriously. And I think in the political process that we're going through right now, between now and next November, I think at any opportunity that anybody can ask these politicians that are running, what would they do? Or what is their plan to help defend our nation's critical infrastructure from these attacks? And anybody that's operating, any of these politicians that have any background with abusing that, and you know where I'm going with this, but any background with abusing that, they need to be taken to task and really drilled into as far as, if your behavior was like this, why should we expect that your behavior is going to change when you become the President of the United States?
Yes, but sir, here's something that when you talk about that, and I, as a private citizen myself, I say all the time I hear the politicians or anybody say you should be aware and follow if you see something, say for example at an airport or in another place, they say, well, just be aware. What are we supposed to be aware of? That's what I think. It's very difficult for the average citizen to know what to do.
Yeah, I think that's right. That it's exactly right. Most people, they just don't want to be bothered. They want to be able to get about their day and do whatever it is that they had planned on doing. The challenge is that when we put a lot of otherwise, private data out there, when you send your Social Security number, and I'm telling you, it's almost impossible to avoid what it is that we are asked to do with our personal information, because banks ask for it, hospitals ask for it. So, what we have to do is we have to really rethink how we are going to share our private information, particularly, even things like little things like family photos as an example. I mean, but you see the young generation that we have, they're posting anything out there and they don't seem to mind. And so that's okay. I mean, on one hand, but on the other hand, I know that that our great FBI is dealing with cases today that deal with data being taken as a hostage, and then these criminals, they call back to the people, businessmen or families, and they are basically ransoming their data back for money, and it's upwards as high as $25,000 to $50,000 to get some of that data back.
Wow.
If you want it protected. So this is a very real problem. People just need to be aware of it. They need to do what they can. It doesn't mean, to change all your habits, but it certainly means to at least be aware that your the communications that you have, the data that you're putting on all these computers and stuff, it's not protected. It is not. Now, there's new technologies that are coming online, that are coming out, that can protect people's personal information, and certainly businesses' personal or personal data for what they try to do to protect their customers and stuff like that. And that's going to change our habits again, because this interaction, and I'll finish with this, Susan, on this point. Mm-hmm. This interaction between human beings and technology, just in the last 5, maybe 10 years, has really changed the way our entire society operates. So something that everybody has to start to become more and more aware of.
Well, General Flynn, you co-authored and published the influential report called Fixing Intel, a blueprint for making intelligence relevant in Afghanistan. This emphasized the importance of social cultural understanding for effective intelligence operations. Now, I want my audience to know, is this book really giving them all the ideas and the thoughts and the understanding of how to really deal with this problem?
Yeah, I think it does, and of course I wrote it at a time when I was in combat in Afghanistan, because I felt so strongly about how we were making a big mistake about where we were failing actually to recognize the societal underpinnings of the situation we were dealing with in Afghanistan. But that particular report, it could have easily stated, and it could state today, Fixing Intelligence, a blueprint. Instead of Afghanistan, you could say a blueprint for Syria, a blueprint for Washington, D.C., a blueprint for Newport, Rhode Island. I mean, it could be the concept and the ideas and the thoughts that were put into that particular report that has application globally, because it's the idea, again, of understanding the why as much as the where things are occurring. Very, very important.
Sir, this is something also that intrigues me. I'm just curious, and maybe you can't answer this, but do you think that we belonged in Afghanistan?
Yes, I do. I think we belonged in Afghanistan because that's where the enemy that attacked us on 9/11 trained. We know that for sure. And so our response was to go into Afghanistan. I think was appropriate. I think that we, in hindsight, we definitely didn't completely understand the what I describe as the operational environment, which is really as much the people as it is the physical ground. We didn't understand it the way we needed to, and I think that we made some early mistakes. But that was appropriate to go back and destroy those camps and rid Afghanistan of this scourge of Al-Qaeda that existed at that time. But then, of course, they all ran into Pakistan, and whenever you have a safe haven for a terrorist organization, it's going to drag on and on and on. And so as we see it today, our embassy in Kabul today, in the last 24 hours, had a major threat against that embassy. So we're still dealing with this, 14 years later. But Afghanistan was the appropriate place to go, given where these guys trained, and we needed to do certain things. We should have been far more specific. And I've said this publicly in other forums and for many years. A time looking, it's hindsight's 20/20, but a time that we probably should have departed Afghanistan was right around 2004. And that was after the first presidential election, and just turned it back over to them and probably, did some training of their forces and their police, but not to get to where we ended up, and which is, again, you see where we are today. And I think we've actually caused it to be a much longer problem.
Mm-hmm. So I don't know if you want to address this, but let's talk about some of our presidents. What do you think of Bush?
Well, I think that President Bush, he was a president that I think went on emotion as much as looking at sort of, and I'm generalizing here, so I apologize to you and your audience, but I think he went more on emotions in some cases than actually stepping back, taking a deep breath, and taking a deep, long look at what is the problem that we're facing. Now we're talking specifically about fighting this terrorist problem that we have. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's other issues like education and immigration and healthcare and all the other pieces, but I think for this case, my observation, watching, our leadership very closely was more, from an emotional standpoint. So it was a reaction rather than being very proactive and thinking through methodically what it was that we were going to do. Yeah. In Obama's case, let me back up 1 second. I also think that Bush was a leader who recognized when he was failing or when we were failing, because he recognized and he made appropriate changes in Iraq. So in 2006, we realized we were losing that war in Iraq in 2006. He recognized that failure. And I think that's a good characteristic of a leader, is to recognize when things aren't going so well, right, and to be able to say, we've screwed this up, and you know what? We're going to change. We're going to change our strategy. We're going to put new horses in. He brought in General Dave Petraeus. He brought in Secretary of Defense Bob Gates. He changed out the general officer that was in command in Iraq, and he changed out the Secretary of Defense at that time, Rumsfeld. So he recognized that. He made the change. That's a tough thing for a president to do, to say that, hey, we're failing. But he did, and that was a big change. Now, Obama's an individual who has very, very little experience. Yet we as a nation put him in charge twice as the president. And so this is a guy who takes advice from a very small group of people. And although he'll stand there and he'll say, I listen to everybody. I see in my experiences, because I actually have never, as a guy with an enormous amount of experience in the issue that we're talking about, in terms of, this is really about the Middle East, because this is really where this cauldron is at right now. I have a lot of experience in it. I was never once called to speak to him about it as the head of not only one of his largest intelligence agencies, but it's also, a guy who had a lot of, experience in the Middle East, well more than 10 years. I've got better part of 30 years experience in that region.
What do you attribute that to? I mean,
I just think that it's part of this group of people that he has around him that he listens to, and he's struggling. He's really struggling to say, I don't have an effective strategy. Our strategy is failing. He's struggling to do that. And I mean, for you and for your audience, what do I want to do every day? I want to cheer for our president. I don't want to say that our president is making a mistake, or our president is this or that. I want to cheer for our president. I want to cheer for our country. That's what I want to do. Right. But when I see that our leaders are not recognizing that something's not right, something's not working, then I feel I have a responsibility as not only a professional, but as an American citizen and someone with a lot of experience and who has studied this problem and has studied our country for a long time and love it. I feel I have a responsibility to say something. I mean, it's like, the see something, say something. Mm-hmm. Well, I see something big strategically that is not working, and I feel I have an obligation as a former military officer, as an American, to say something.
Yes.
And I hope that my voice carries along to some ears, and people go, you know what? I'm going to get involved. I need to get involved, even if it's just go vote. I mean, I don't care who you vote for, but vote for somebody who you think is going to take this country down a path that has a long-term vision, not just a vision for a 4-year stint in the White House.
Mm-hmm. Now, let's talk about this for a minute. You served as a senior intelligence officer for the Joint Special Operations Command. During that time, were you credited with creating innovative interrogation techniques leading to breakthroughs in counterterrorism operations in Iraq and Afghanistan? And how did you calculate these techniques would work?
Well, so the answer is yes. I was brought in at a time when we were going through the throes of the just real tragedy of Abu Ghraib, when we had just incredible lack of leadership, lack of oversight, lack of judgment. And so I was brought in pretty much immediately after that. And one of the things that I was asked to do by my boss at the time was to fix the interrogation processes. And I had just come from being the senior trainer for the United States Army and frankly for the United States government, the senior trainer, I was the commander of our interrogation school. I mean, and that was one of the components of the school that I was the commander of. So I came from that environment, and I went right into combat first started in Iraq. And so what I did was I took the rules that we were given, the doctrine that we had, and I said, look, we're gonna do this by the book. And we're gonna follow the rules that we have. We're gonna do this interrogation based on our values, what we believe in, and what is good for America. And so what I did though was we combined the operational people that we had, the special forces guys and gals that we had. We teamed them with the interrogators. We brought in law enforcement professionals. So we brought in members of the FBI. We brought in members of the Drug Enforcement Agency. We brought in members of Immigration and Customs. We brought in members of Border Patrol. And we brought in some technologists and some other what I would call humanists or sociologists. And I brought together people that would not normally be involved in interrogations on a battlefield. And we basically built the capability. It took me about a year to build it and to get the culture of the organization right. And we basically combined different skills, different capabilities, different people with some innovative ways of using technology to conduct interrogations. And we got a lot of leadership support. We got an awful lot of leadership support out of the Department of Defense and out of Special Operations Command. We followed the doctrine. We followed the law. I was personally involved on a daily basis in all this. I put my name on the line and my credibility on the line because I said we will never have a problem like we had in Abu Ghraib as long as I can help it in the areas where I was responsible. So the innovation was a combination of different types of people, bringing them together with some new processes, some very new processes that we were using, and using some systems and technologies that had not been used in the ways that we were using them in the past. And for example, like we used geospatial awareness tools, basically where you are physically on the ground, and we actually taught some of the guys that we captured how to use geospatial awareness tools because they were witting. So they wanted to help because they knew that they were captive, so they wanted to help. And we taught them how to use those tools, and that allowed them to show us where they were operating on the battlefield geospatially with some really exceptional geospatial tools. Whereas in the past, you put a map up on the wall and you'd have a guy point to the map, and the map would be, very confusing and old. And so I said, why are we doing that? Why don't we use some of the geospatial tools that we're using out in our operations center, which are state of the art? So that's just one example of how we did that. And boy, I'm going to tell you, we went from doing about 5 combat raids a month in the middle of the summer of 2004 to 300 a month in the middle of the summer of 2006. Mm-hmm. So whatever that math calculation is in terms of a percentage increase, and that increase allowed us to put sufficient pressure on the Al-Qaeda network in Iraq and to a degree in Afghanistan to be able to settle that fire down a little bit so the larger conventional forces could bring security back into the cities and the towns. I'm afraid that we're going to have to do some of that now in places like Syria and Iraq again. I'm afraid that we're running out of choices here because we've let too much time pass.
I'm going to get to a question about ISIS in a moment, but first I want to ask you something. With all the increases in technology and all of the wonderful things that technology offers us, how come we're still dealing with all of this trouble, these problems, and why do these people hate us as much as they do?
Yeah, it's really, oh my God, it's a fascinating subject, and it's one that I have put an awful lot of my time into, to include sitting down with senior members of Al-Qaeda and senior members of the Taliban. Of course, they were captive and asking them that same question, why? Why is it that you hate us like this? I mean, what have we done? And you really have to go back to the whole, you've got to understand the Islamic religion. You have to understand Sharia law. You have to understand the different variations and interpretations of Sharia law and the Quran and these things they call the hadiths, which are sort of they're sort of, I'm going to use a lousy analogy, but they're sort of a bill of rights within the Quran, but they're not like ours, believe me. Mm-hmm. And you have to understand these things, and the way that these guys, this ISIS, the way I believe that they seriously misinterpret their own religion. Now, here's a guy that's I'm not an expert. I don't say that I'm an expert on the religion, but I am an expert on this enemy. And I will tell you, they are Islamic. They do interpret the Islamic laws, Sharia law, particularly, the way that they want to interpret them. They do have a belief system that says they should dominate the world, and they are intent on doing that. So, to understand why, you really do have to study who it is that they are and what kind of guys that they represent and what sort of their thinking is. But they're very intent on dominating the world through a very methodical means over a long period of time. So they're not, trying to win the war in Syria and then that'll be the end of it and everybody will go back home. They're actually trying to take this caliphate that they have created and they're spreading that globally. And I think that we're kidding ourselves to think that they don't have the capability to do that over, a long time. And when I say a long time, maybe it's 20 years, maybe it's 30 years, maybe it's 50 years, but that's their intention. And I will tell you, if you study the future and demographics and changes in the demographic landscape and how they're able to influence young people, particularly around the world, it can be a bit scary when you're studying this thing. That's why we cannot afford to waste any more time. And I really do hope, because again, like I said earlier, I want to cheer for my president. I hope that our president recognizes that the United States must lead. The United States has to lead. When the United States doesn't lead, you have these huge vacuums that get filled by others. And probably the largest vacuum occurred in the middle of the Middle East in a place called, Baghdad when we left in 2011. And when that vacuum was created, it was immediately filled by these radicals. And they're there. They're there. And they're also now in other places around the world.
Was it a mistake to get rid of Saddam?
I think it was a strategic error, and I think that history will not be kind because of that decision. Saddam was a bad guy. His sons were ruthless, and we probably could have done a bunch of other things, like sanctions and some other stuff to keep him in a place where we needed to keep him. And instead we decided to go in a big way, as everybody knows now, from the invasion of Iraq. And it just, when I looked at it, okay, the intelligence was there maybe, but it was obviously poor. And there were people in the intelligence community and others that were saying, that's all water under the bridge. So to answer your question directly, yes. I mean, absolutely. And you can't say, oh no, it was a good thing to get rid of Saddam sitting here today or standing here today talking to you, Susan. I mean, it was a tragic error, and it was a huge strategic mistake. Now, all that said, did we learn from it? We didn't. We did not learn from it because the next president made an even bigger mistake, and a cause of the second strategic mistake is now this rise of this Islamic State, which is even worse than the last guys that we dealt with under Al-Qaeda in Iraq. So we for some reason, and again, presidents of this country can't go and say, well, the last guy was not good, and so I'm not going to be like the last guy. No, a president has to lead the country, not lead a party. When we have a president that leads a party, we have elected the wrong leader. And we need a president that leads this country and is serious about it. And Katie bars the door if his or her party doesn't agree with what they say. If it's not good for this country, then the president of the United States cannot, has to make the decision that's what's best for this country. And it has to be done over the long haul. A president has to see, not just one administration to the next. A president has to have a vision that looks out like 7 or 8 presidents. Mm-hmm. I mean, they have to have a long-term vision for this country. And I don't see that right now. And I frankly didn't see it under Bush either. But, I know we're not arguing that point right now. But I don't see that long-term vision for this country coming out of our leadership in the White House.
Now, you have a reputation for being blunt when it comes to speaking your mind about important issues that face our country. You have had recent articles quoted as saying the president is wrong on ISIS strategy. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, he's wrong by saying we have a strategy and it's working. I mean, you can't sit in your living rooms around the country today and watch the news, and that's looking at both sides because there's all sorts of bias in our news. You can't sit there today and go, yeah, things are working out just fine. I can tell you, they're not. I mean, our country, our national security structure, our police, especially our police forces around the country, our FBI, our intelligence services, and our military are working their butts off. Because we're trying to plug holes and put Band-Aids on all these problems out there instead of having a clear, coherent, long-term strategy as to how to deal with this problem. And that's why I have been very blunt about this, because I've watched it, I've been part of it, and I made my thoughts known while I was in uniform, and now I'm out of uniform.
Right.
So anyway.
Yeah, well, General Flynn, this is interesting because you have so much experience with foreign affairs, and many of the candidates for president now have very little knowledge, very little understanding of what's going on. So, this is you're gonna laugh when I ask you this, but since you know so much, why not run for president?
My first thought is, are you crazy? Are you out of your mind? I mean, is anybody else listening? Are you, So, I'll tell you what. I love this country. I feel passionate about it. But I really do believe that there are ways that people in our country can help our country through different means, and so I'm waffling a little bit, Susan, because it's not an easy answer, because I want to help this country, and I will help it, and I have been helping it. Anybody that asks me for their advice, I will give them my best advice. Excuse me. But I, this is one that I just think it's so hard to run for any political office these days, and it's very expensive too.
Yes.
So I'm here to help. I will roll up my sleeves for anyone who wants help, and I'll give them my best advice, and I'll give them my most candid advice, which as you said earlier, I tend to be very thoughtful, but very blunt when it comes to, Now I will give and take too. I don't mind a good debate because I don't feel like I always have the right answer. I just feel like I know quite a bit, and I do, and I understand. I understand a lot because this has been my life. I've spent my life doing this, and I've been given an enormous opportunity and an enormous privilege to be educated by, through my experiences, and on behalf of the United States of America. So that's a long question to your answer to your tough question.
No, I understand that it's a tough question. I mean, I often think about who would want to run for president under the circumstances that we're in now, and look at all the money spent. In fact, I think one of the problems, and I'm giving you my thoughts of what's going on, is that when people run for president, all they want to do is get elected. And so, in the process of that, they don't pay attention to the things that are as important as they are. They're thinking about getting reelected and reelected.
Yeah.
This is what's going on. Now, you've been awarded the Defense Superior Service Medal, Legion of Merit, Bronze Star Medal, Meritorious Service Medal, Joint Service. It keeps on going on, and several service campaign medals. What a great accomplishment. Don't you think that? And how do you feel about it?
Well, I mean, my greatest accomplishment, I hope, is that I've been a good father and husband and person. All the things that you get. I mean, they're nice, and it's it's a real honor to be recognized for your achievements. I want people to say that when somebody goes, oh yeah, I know Mike Flynn, he's a good guy, I mean, that they'll have other choice words, I'm an Irishman and I know what people say sometimes, So but I want people to know that if I'm on your side, you got a good friend, and I will be, very, very loyal, to a fault at times, but as I've grown and learned, and thought about what it is that we're facing, I also am not, somebody who's just going to tell you what you want to hear. I have been around too many people like that, and I don't like people like that. I want people who challenge me, and I want to be challenged because life is short, and I've been to too many memorial services, I've been to too many rampside ceremonies and too many funerals, watching great young men, mostly, but women as well, who have given the ultimate sacrifice for this country and won't have what you and I have right now, which is this great free-flowing, free conversation.
Right.
They'll never experience that. They'll never be exposed to that, and not to mention the families that they left behind. So there's a reason and a purpose for why we're here, and I hope my purpose is to help this country be better.
Yes. So what's on your bucket list?
My bucket list is, I don't know. Simple things. I like peanut butter and jelly sandwiches.
So you're just a regular guy, is that?
I grew up in a large family. I'm one of 9 children, and my parents, sadly, my father died a few years back, and my mother just died this past year, just less than a year ago. So,
sorry.
My bucket list is to just spend time with my family. I have a couple of grandkids. That's simple. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
Really is.
And so I always love to give my guests the last word. So there is so much for us to talk about, and I do want to have another show with you. I think it would be very interesting to get more input from you about what's going on. But give our audience the last word.
Well, first, Susan, thank you for having me and allowing me to say something. I think for your audience, I would just offer for the people that are listening to get involved in our country, even if it's at the local community level and you're from a really small town. And I grew up in a small town. Get involved. Try to get your children involved. Try to participate in the conversation. Stay informed. For anybody who says, well, I don't know what's going on, with the amount of information available today, that's a poor excuse. So try your best to understand what's going on. And then I guess the very last word for me is just be a good person. Be a good person to others as hard as that is at times. I think that's probably the best piece of advice, Mm-hmm. It's the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And I think that's really important. My father taught me that, and he said, that's a really, really important rule, and it still is very important today. So again, thank you, Susan, for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Now, I can't help but asking. I know I just ask you to give the last word, but I'm, there's so much information that we can get from you, and so just give me a little bit of extra time. I need to find out, and of course you don't have to answer this, but we have a whole group of people running for president now, and you've heard, I'm sure, some of the debates. Now, is there anybody? And again, this is very personal, but is there anybody that you really think should be president?
Wow. I think that there's a couple of the people that are running that could be decent presidents. And I think that, and I use the word decent because I want a person to be president who is a decent person, a nice but tough leader. And I look for leadership qualities more than I look for their brains or what school they went to or how much money they're worth. I look for decent, positive leadership because I do believe that not everybody is going to know everything. And so are they capable of recognizing in others their talents, and you bring the right types of people around. I studied Abraham Lincoln quite a bit in my own, in my own education, and there's a good book called Team of Rivals. Abraham Lincoln is a fascinating leader in our country, and thank God we had him. Otherwise, we'd be totally different. And he recognized in himself that he did not have the answers to everything. But what he knew was that he couldn't bring a bunch of people like him around him. He brought people around him that were absolutely, juxtaposed. They were totally opposite of each other in their views and their role in life. And he managed over a very difficult period of time for our country before he was, brutally assassinated. He managed to keep our country stitched together. But he also made some really tough decisions. And he particularly military decisions, he got rid of people that he didn't think, had the best interest of the country at heart. Not necessarily of him, but of the country. And so I think that we should look in our potential future presidents, the qualities of some of the best leaders we've had running this country over our relatively short history. From Washington to Hamilton to people like Lincoln to people like Roosevelt, people like Ronald Reagan, John F. Kennedy. Sadly, John F. Kennedy, I think he would be around today. I think he'd be stunned by the direction of this country. I don't think he would, were he around today, he wouldn't be happy the direction that this country's taken. So I think that that's what we need to look for in these leaders that we are looking at now to potentially be our next president. The people that are your listeners, they need to be looking for the qualities of leadership that are characteristic traits that are just that are good, decent, tough though. And I use the word tough, respectfully because they need to be tough. Not all decisions are easy. And so anyway, I hope that answers your question.
It sure does. Well, today we were speaking to General Michael Flynn. It's an honor to have you on my show, General Flynn.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to The Susan Brender Show. To be a guest, email sebrender@yahoo.com.